The carousel from Clutch Elements is a 100% stylable carousel, allowing you to build and work with it in a variety of different ways. Whether you're building a nice marquee showing off different brand logos on your website, or you're trying to display all the different testimonials in a nice, convenient horizontal carousel, you also have ways of showing off image galleries, either in vertical, or horizontal formats. This carousel and all the different carousels that you see here on this overview are all built with the carousel that we ship from the Elements library. I'm going to be taking you through this video and sharing with you how you can configure a carousel. So that's everything from dropping a carousel in onto your website to walking through the anatomy of all the different parts that make up a carousel, and discussing some of the properties that you can use to configure carousels in a multitude of different ways. Then we'll be jumping into styling a carousel, and in between configuring and styling, we'll discuss a couple of the templates that are available from the insert menu. And then finally, we'll cover how to use carousel with multiple slides and also using the auto scroll properties. I want to save those two versions, particularly for last, because there's a couple caveats that go along with using carousel in that way that I want you to be aware of. So that way, whenever you run into these instances where you need a multiple slide carousel and auto scrolls carousel, you have the tools that you need to make sure that you're using it in the most efficient way. First things first, we'll go ahead and learn how we can configure a carousel. And so the first thing that we'll need to do is insert one from the library. So I'll search for carousel from Clutch Elements. And already I want to go ahead and point out that whenever you search for a carousel or you go to the Elements library and you get to the carousel, you'll find that there's a multitude of different templates here available for you to pick. We decided to, since carousel is such a unique component and there's a ton of different ways that you can work with it, we decided to go ahead and create a couple base templates that allow you as a user to be able to pick one of these carousels that more closely represents your end outcome, hopefully allowing you to build faster and quicker as you work with these carousels. So everything from a multiple slide carousel to carousels with numbers. So you get a nice little indicator that shows which slide out of how many slides are present, to even carousel with progress bars, thumbnails, vertical, and our default carousel. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the default carousel just to talk about the anatomy and all the parts that make up the carousel itself. So first we have the carousel. This is the kind of like parent or root element, that root component that makes up everything that a carousel is. So it houses all of the different carousel parts. So we have the carousel viewport is the next component. This carousel viewport is essentially the viewport window on which the slides will render inside of. And then by default, actually, let's go ahead and go through the rest of the anatomy. So we got the carousel viewport. This is where all of the slides themselves will render inside this like little window. And then we have the individual carousel slides. So you can think of this as like the track, or like where all the slides will be stitched onto. And then these will be what is moved inside of the carousel viewport. And then the carousel slides, the track holds all of the individual slides. Next, we have the controls down at the bottom. So I open up this row, and all of this is just a regular row, actually a row with a couple rows inside of it that we've just styled to split up and separate the controls a little bit. But you'll have a previous and next, And these are just action, or these are like behavior components. And so like a behavior component really doesn't have anything to style necessarily. It really just is the brains and holds some type of logic that is specifically tied to the carousel itself. So there's other behavior components in the elements library, and we'll also have a video that kind of goes over behavior components in another video. But again, just think of this as just like this holds the logic and the methods of like, how does the previous button work? How does the next button work? And then it also allows you to be able to just drop in buttons or text or whatever you want to have that behavior to perform the previous and next action, and just be able to drop in anything and it just work. And no, you don't have to worry about wiring anything up. So for example, this button, it's just a button with a little chevron left icon. I could remove that button and add text here into this carousel behavior component. And then I will rename this to previous. And so this will now be my previous action. Like I can click this and I can go backwards and click the other button and go forwards. So it's a really awesome thing about behavior components. Additionally, there are more than just the carousel previous and next. We also have a carousel indicator. So this can be anything from these little dot indicators to even the thumbnails that you saw in the template previews there. Those will also work as indicators. And I'll run through an example of that template and show you how that works. Some other behaviors that are a part of Carousel are like a play and a pause button. And what else am I missing? I think I'll double check the Carousel components. Carousel. So we got forwards and backwards. And then of course, previous and next. Here, those previous and next buttons are just going up and down. So we have play and pause, and that's it. So that's everything there as far as that's being covered. Next, I want to talk about a couple of the properties that exist on Carousel. So Carousel can be worked with in a multitude of different ways. So by default, we give you a property called autoplay, and this is set to true. And so when the page loads, you have a carousel on, it'll automatically, after a small delay, start transitioning to the next slide. You can increase this delay by adding the delay property. And then this is measured in milliseconds. So right now it's after 4,000 milliseconds. If we bump this down to 500 milliseconds, it's like half a second. And then we refresh this, and whenever it loads, we'll start seeing the slides transition at a much quicker and faster rate. I'm going to remove that, let that go back to its default property. So that's how you add additional properties to the carousel. As you can see here, this list is very long. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these properties, but just know that these properties are here. These are for you to take control of the functionality of the carousel entirely. Things like setting up, what's another one here? The axis. So this is how we create that, the vertical, by adding the axis, and then we can transition and make the slides move up and down vertically rather than horizontally. You can align the carousel viewport and how everything is centered in there. And then what are some others that we'll be covering? So later on in this video, we'll be covering the auto scroll and loop. Actually, I mean, we can discuss loop now, and then we'll also come back to it at the end whenever we start talking about auto scroll. But by default, without the loop, so right now it's set to false. Whenever you get to the end of a carousel, you can no longer click or advance any further. If you would like to incorporate the functionality where a user can click and advance further or use the drag on their trackpad to move further. What you would do is set this value to true, and then, did not mean to drag that out of the frame. Should have play mode back on. And then from there, you can click, and once you reach to the last slide, if you click again, the slideshow starts over, and then also works in the reverse direction too. Additionally, I wanted to go over the carousel indicators, and then we'll jump into how these carousel indicators actually. Before I move into carousel indicators, let's just double check and make sure that there are no other properties that I'm missing here. So carousel viewport doesn't have any properties, don't need to worry about it. Same with the slides or carousel slide. Really all of the properties that you'll be worried about and managing will all be on the root carousel component itself. The carousel indicator, again, these are behaviors similar to the previous and next, like I showed earlier. How this is styled is essentially we have a loop, and then we're looping over the amount of images that exist here in the carousel slides. So this is automatically computed by the carousel under the hood, and the carousel exposes this state value of how many slides exist with this scroll snap list. And so this array is equal to the array of slides that exist here. And then from there, with this indicator inside this loop, we're able to generate a indicator for each individual image. And then whenever you click on any of these indicators, it'll navigate you to that slide, and then also highlight the indicator or change the color of the indicator's outline with some styling. So before we jump into styling, I want to talk about ways that you can configure Carousel and make it a little bit more, more dynamic, because oftentimes you'll be fetching data from your backend. Maybe it's for a gallery or a set of testimonials, and you'll want to display or show those testimonials like inside of a carousel. So I'm going to start first by duplicating this carousel, this little bento here, and we'll get it out into its own frame off to the side. Give it some more room. And we'll close this here. So, and then I'm going to actually use another carousel template, and we'll use the carousel with thumbnails. So the first thing that I would do if I wanted to use this thumbnail carousel in combination of some data that I'm fetching from a backend is I first want to grab the data and make sure that that data is exposed and able to be used inside of this carousel. So I'm going to wrap the whole carousel in a data. So I'm going to hold Shift, and this turns the select context from a insert to now a wrap in. So whenever I do that, it'll wrap my carousel in a data. From here, I can use the REST API action to perform a new query, and I am going to use the fake store API. I'm just going to get some products. This is all for just an example purposes. So I'm just going to use this, or I could use, I don't have it set up right now. Otherwise I would use the WordPress backend. So for the time being, we'll just use this API. And then from here, we now have data that we can use inside of the carousel. So we have some static slides here. These are just manually input. We no longer need all of these slides. We just need one single slide. So I'm going to remove and delete all of the slides except for one. And then I'm going to wrap the single slide in a loop. And then this way I can bind the loop to the data that's coming back from that API. And then from there, we now have 20 items that are available in this carousel. And so we can scroll through each of these 20 items. Can't really tell much has changed because the individual slide itself is still using the static image. So let's go ahead and bind to the image of one of those products inside the loop here. So here inside this loop, there's an image. And then while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a text that tells us what the product is. We can add the title, give this a little refresh. Text isn't rendering. Let's see. Why is that text not showing up? Nope, don't want to add a picture that way. Okay, so what we have here is the entire slide is very off center. Like we have the text way on the far left and the image on the far right. So I'm going to sneak in a little bit of styling here and just wrapping both my image and a text in a flex column. And then that way I can align things vertically and do a max width on this column of maybe 300 pixels. Okay, that's there and visible now. Looks like I just needed to add the align items and a flex to the carousel slide. And then from there, we've got everything nice and centered now. And so as we advance through this carousel, we see both the image and also the title of the product. And then with the carousel indicators, since all these carousel indicators are supposed to match up to the amount of slides, and it's also supposed to be indicative of the same array, I am going to do the same steps where I'm going to remove all of the carousel indicators except for the one, and then wrap it in a loop, bind it to the data that's coming back. And then each of the images that are a part of this carousel indicator, I will then bind to the loop itself. It should be working. I don't see my indicators though. So let's figure out why that is. All right, so what I've done here is I decided to just add a width to the overall carousel to not allow the carousel to be super wide. So that's why the thumbnails were way off to the side. But essentially, we now have our thumbnails now matching along with the carousel image. And so this image is actually still a little large. So I'm going to just force that image down. All right. So that's much better. So we now have a carousel with an image and a text set with inside of a flex column with the items aligned centered. And then we have the carousel slide with no styling on it. I didn't need that styling like I added before. And then we have the carousel just with a width to constrain it to not try and span the entire length of the canvas. I think that's what I was trying to do. And then we have our loop that's looping over each of the products returned from the query. And then we also have we have another loop also looping over that same products returned from the query. This gives us two different loops, one loop for creating the individual slides and another loop for creating all of the individual thumbnails. And so with all that bound together, we're able to click through and have this nice carousel that shows off the different products that are being returned. But again, this could be used for your testimonials or maybe even comments that are stored somewhere in your backend. Really any type of like custom post type, whatever it may be that you have, that you're storing, then you want to be able to have a carousel that allows your users to slide and transition through a set of items. Next, we'll jump into talking about how the carousel can be styled. And so we've already touched on some aspects of styling, but that was mainly for styling like the individual card itself. And so here I have like part of an example where this carousel is set up to show off a set of testimonials. And really it's the testimonial card that is the most important thing. And I'm gonna show how I got to this box. Like what I've done is I've taken the controls and I've moved them around where I have the controls spaced around the carousel viewport. I've also got the carousel dot indicators absolutely positioned. And so if we start this over and we add a carousel from Clutch Elements again, wait for this. This can be achieved by taking our individual carousel previews and wrapping them around the viewport element. And so carousel next. And then change the carousel display to that of a flex, and then we can align the items centered here. Next thing is we want to absolutely position our indicator dots right here in the center of the viewport. This can be achieved by first applying a position relative to the carousel. This is going to be the parent container. And then we want to be able to position absolute positions, components that are inside of it relative to this. So we'll take then our row that contains our indicators and we'll drag this out and clean this up a little bit because we don't need those other two row elements. And then here we can absolutely position this. And we can do from the bottom, maybe 20 pixels. And then the carousel justify the content in the center. And then we can style the indicators because it's a little hard to see a few of these. So we'll style the instance of this block here that's working as the indicator. So we'll change the background to something a little brighter. We could be blue. Oh, no, that's maybe the bright blue. Yeah, it's a little easier to see. And then the selected state. So when the current slide is active, we'll just change this color to something like red. Red will be easy to see. So now whenever we click through, our indicators are now different colors and highlighting the indicator correctly. Some other things that you would want to do is maybe if you have images like this that don't take up the entire viewport and you want your viewport a different color, the viewport itself can be styled. So let's add a background color. And then the entire carousel, if you wanted to, we could give this some padding and kind of create like a border. Let's see. Looks like there's already padding there. And then give this. And add a little radius, soften the edges. Same with the viewport. And so now we have a nice and styled carousel. I could keep taking this further. Again, even everything that you saw during the overview slide and how all those carousels were styled, those were all styled using this carousel. So the options are really endless on what you can do with this and how you can create carousels in your own projects. Next, let's move into the last two chapters where we'll discuss how to use the multiple slides and also the auto scroll and some of the pitfalls that you might run into while using these properties. So the first thing is using the multi-slide carousel. And so I already have a multi-slide carousel here that I'm using. And just for the sake of showing exactly what you would get if you were to drag a carousel out, there is a carousel with multiple slides as part of the template that you can use. It's just like the default template and all also the carousel with thumbnails, other than it's using controls and these indicators. And the individual slides themselves, the only difference is that they have some styling here where we're adding a flex and a basis of 33% to each of the slides. So by giving these a basis value of 33%, it will show 3 slides within the viewport at any given time. We can come through and change this to 25% for each of these, and then we'll have 4 slides being displayed. And so now the carousel slides will show 4 slides in the viewport at any given time. So one thing I recommend when using carousel with multiple slides, of course, is instead of doing this individually to each slide, if you are using the carousel in a static format like this, I would recommend using a class. So the first thing that I would do also is convert these instance styles to a class. So this automatically creates a carousel slide 2. And then I would go through and remove the instance style and add the class here to each of these. And with each of the carousel slides all having a class now, you can come through and quickly change this back to 33% or 25% to show how many slides you want. And then if we were to go Actually, let's use 33% again. Yeah. And that allows you to, yeah. And so now with each of the slides having a class tied to them, you're able to quickly change how many slides you have present at one time, because whenever I alter and change this class to 33%, it'll apply that 33% to each of the individual slides that also has this class tied to it. So now that we have an understanding of how the multi-slide carousel works and how you can set it up, how you can display multiple slides at any given time, let's go over some of the caveats and pitfalls that you need to be aware of. One of those is I have a carousel with 5 slide items. If I have a carousel with 5 slide items and I set the basis here to something like 20%, that'll try and show 5 slides at any given time, the carousel becomes less of a interactive carousel and now just like a static gallery. The controls will cease to exist. Your dot indicator will only show that there's one position that can be navigated through. And that's because there are no more slides that can be moved through. So just be aware of that. There's not any magic that can be worked in to allow this to still be interactive to your users if the amount of slides is equal to or less than the basis number of like how many slides you want to try and fit into the viewport at any time. So that's really it with the multiple slide carousel. So as long as you're aware of that and you understand that limitation exists, everything else works really great, where clicking previous and next, you get the ability to just move and advance one slide forward. You can also change that ability on how many slides you want to advance forward. So we start back at the beginning. This is a property that you can apply to the carousel. So there is a property in here, slides to scroll, if I remember correctly. So group slides together, drag interactions, dot, navigation, previous and next. So right now it's mapped to only do one slide at a time. If we bump this up to 2 and hit play, it'll navigate forward 2 slides. There's a little lag there. I think maybe just because of the video recording, but the slides will navigate forward and backwards by 2 slides rather than just the 1. So that's another property that you want to keep in your back pocket when using the multiple slide carousel. When working with the auto scroll carousel, similar to the like marquee looking carousel that was on the overview page, I'll go ahead and just set it up. So we'll first grab a carousel. Actually, let's grab the multi-slide carousel. We'll use that one. With the multi-slide carousel, we can then use the property auto scroll. And when this is set to true, we'll automatically scroll the carousel. So I'm going to hit true on this, and then we'll see this nice marquee, smooth scroll animation where all of our slides are going through. And then when it gets to the end, it will stop. So if you wanted to infinitely loop, this is where we're bringing that loop property back in. I'll add this. And then whenever the carousel gets to the end of the slide, it will start back over on to the very first slide again. So I'm just waiting for that. And there's the first slide. And we've started over. So we have this infinite smooth scrolling animation. Now that we understand how this works, how you can set it up yourself and work with the auto scroll, what you'll often find sometimes when doing this is again, whenever you try and have more slides present than what the carousel can physically show at any given time, it will kind of cause funky interactions and the carousel not work fully. So one of those is like one, if you only have, since this is showing 3 slides at any given time, if you only have 3 slides, the entire carousel will freeze up and not be able to go. So this goes for everything, whether you're showing 3 slides, 5 slides, 10 slides at any given time, and you're trying to make it carousel or auto scroll across the entire page. And there are only the same number of slides, as many slides as you're trying to show at any given time, you will run into that issue where the carousel just physically can't or doesn't have anything to scroll or loop over back into when set up this way. Other than that, if you have more slides, then there are slides being shown at any given time, then everything is A-OK. Now, the only other thing that I didn't really cover is earlier in the styles. Just as one last tip to style slides and everything, each of the slides automatically have a little bit of left padding to give this spacing here to them. And you can see the left padding. There is on the left padding, whenever the padding's set to all here, you can see that it is set to 16 pixels. Let me double check, and let me go back to this multi-slide carousel since there's classes on it. And we can modify it here. So if you didn't want any of that padding and you wanted all of your slides to be butted up right next to each other, here is an example of that. And now they're all tied in. And then if you wanted to really space them out, we could even go further. There we go. And now you have these really large spacings in between each of your slides. So that's everything about Carousel from Clutch Elements in a very large nutshell. I know this video is long, but there's a lot to cover with this component in particular. Everything as far as learning how to work with Carousel and the anatomy of all the different parts that make up the component, to working with the different templates and even making Carousel dynamic and passing in data from a backend. We also covered different ways that you can style a carousel and the individual slides, viewport, the carousel itself. And then we covered working with Carousel with multiple slides and some of the pitfalls that come with that, and same with auto scroll. I hope that this video gives you the knowledge you need to be able to build and modify carousels to work as you need them in your own projects. And if you have any questions at all whatsoever, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to us in the community. I'll be happy to answer your questions and be able to provide more feedback on anything that you have a question about. Thank you.